and he's done an amazing job of adapting to the modern era of college football. He knows how to utilize resources via NIL. He knows how to utilize the portal, and he's, as a result, put together a very competitive roster every single year and will likely do so again in 2025 and beyond. Hello and welcome to Always College Football. I'm your host, Greg McElroy. Thanks for being here. I know some of you guys, if you're here in the Southeast, in particular I'm from Alabama, I live in Alabama, we're on spring break this week, but we are still working through it, and we hope that you guys are along with us. We figured we'd have some fun. There's so many rankings going around. There's so many people putting out top 10 quarterbacks, top 10 running backs, top 10 wide receivers, top 10 competitions, top 10 teams in some cases. We've seen all of that, and it's great. But I've kind of realized at this point, man, I don't really know what these teams are going to be. I know there's a lot of teams that I'm intrigued by, but we still have another portal window that we have to navigate through. So we are going to delay our rankings from those positions and teams until the summer. That's when we're going to really dive into some of those things, because at that point, guys are going to kind of be who they are. At least we think they're going to be who they are, depending on injury and stuff like that. That can obviously alter how we rank teams, players, what have you. But one thing that won't change more than likely between now and when toe meets leather on Labor Day weekend, that is the coaches, the head coaches in college football. They are the biggest part of our sport in a transactional world where there's movement amongst the players. The coaches are the ones that are exclusively identifiable with that institution. Now, I know they move around a little bit as well, but the head coaches, for the most part, when they're a great one, they don't often leave for other opportunities. So what we'll do today is we will rank the top 25 head coaches in America here in 2025. Now, we won't be able to fit all 25 in this show. We will do 25 till 11, and then later in the week, we will release 10 through 1. So today's 25 through 11. Later in the week is the top 10. But we know there'll be drama. We know there'll be controversy. A couple things that we're taking into account when identifying these coaches. One, longevity, several of which don't have it. And that's a tough thing to gauge with where these coaches are and what their program might look like. Two, trajectory. Does it appear like your program's on the upswing, or does it appear like maybe your program's leveled off, or maybe in some cases you're on the downswing? Those are another things that we have taken into account. And year-over-year improvement. Those are kind of the three things that I factor in quite a bit when assessing these top 25 coaches, several of which have tremendous year-over-year growth. Now, can it be sustained? That's how you crack the top 10, top 5, etc. So we always encourage you to like, to rate, and to subscribe to the show wherever you get the show. We appreciate those of you that have supported us for a number of years, and we will continue to deliver content as best we can to accommodate your appetites for college football. Let's kick things off, I'm sure, on what should be a dramatic show here on Always College Football with our number 25 head coach in America. Kenny Dillingham of Arizona State comes in at number 25. And now, told you a little while ago in my opening preamble that tenure and length of time, all those things factor in, but also a factor is year-over-year improvement. So while looking at the overall big picture record for Kenny Dillingham, yes, 14-12 as a head coach in his 2 years there in Tempe is not ideal. But look at where they were year one and the growth that they had last year en route to a playoff berth, a conference championship, and given the Texas Longhorns, a team that is outrageously talented, all they wanted was amazing. He was the 2024 Big 12 Coach of the Year. And if you look at his performance against ranked competition, they were 4-1. His roster, by the way, really talented, really solid in some spots, but not outrageously talented to the point in which there's a gap between them and everybody else in the Big 12. That was not the case. So looking at how he elevated that group to a 4-1 record against ranked teams last year was extremely impressive. You look at the recruiting, maybe some ground to be made up there, but the development and identifying diamonds in the rough is something that he's done very well. And he's been well schooled too. He's worked with Dan Lanning, he's worked with Gus Malzahn, and he has also had success with Mike Norvell. So Kenny Dillingham in as our number 25 head coach this season. At number 24, a guy with a pretty similar track record in some ways to Kenny Dillingham is Rhett Lashlee. He's at number 24, the head coach of the SMU Mustangs. Tremendous record of 29-12 in his 3 years at SMU. 22 wins in the last 2 seasons, which is the most in a 2-year span in program history. And people will point back, well, SMU hasn't had a tremendous track record. But if you look back in the 80s, and we don't need to talk about why, they won a lot of games. They had a lot of success. He has now led them into a new era. And while it was easy to kind of evaluate what SMU could do in the AAC, they had more resources than anyone in the AAC. Now that they're in the ACC, there was a big question. How would his ideology translate to the Power Four? Well, we've answered that question pretty dang well. How about a berth in the ACC championship game? How about a playoff appearance last year? Those that would push back would point to the fact that they weren't overly competitive in the college football playoff game. They made a lot of mistakes, a bunch of self-inflicted mistakes, but I think you got to feel pretty good about the trajectory of the program. When you look at SMU before Rhett Lashlee took over to where SMU's at now, do you feel like they're going anywhere? Because I certainly don't. I actually think that the more and more they're able to prove that proof of concept, the more and more Power 5 transfers will consider SMU if they decide to hop in the portal. He also has a young quarterback in Kevin Jennings. If Kevin Jennings can help elevate that program even more and cut down on the mistakes and continue to develop from within the program, they might be in a really good spot to contend again this year, even though they have a lot of considerable losses. Now, recruiting is going to be something that we have to watch because I think at some point they're going to have to focus maybe a little bit more on high school recruiting and a little less on portal transfers, but they're not, I think, at that point just yet. They have to maybe have 2 or 3 more good years before high school players are thinking, you know what, I'll stay in Dallas-Fort Worth as opposed to going elsewhere for my college experience. So Rhett Lashlee's done an amazing job, and for good reason, he cracks the top 25 at number 24. At number 23, it's Curt Cignetti of Indiana. Now, not a long track record at Indiana, and people will point to last year what the strength of schedule was, the strength of record, the resume, who did he beat. All those things are perfectly fair. You also have to take into account what type of situation did he walk into at Indiana. It was bad. It was really bad. And this has not been a program that had experienced high-level success at any point. And he not only walked in, but showed the bravado that, hey, not only will we compete with everybody, we don't feel at Indiana like we take a backseat to anybody. We might not be Ohio State from a tradition standpoint, but we're going to throw our punches. We're going to be brash. We're going to be outspoken. We're going to have a chip on our shoulder, and we're going to beat you with execution and toughness. And the execution was tremendous last year. I think that's a great indicator of how well coached this program was. You look at their personnel, they had good players. There's no denying that they had good players. But those players did not always check the Power 5 box as far as measurables are concerned. They had corners that were undersized. They had defensive ends that were undersized. They had quarterback in Curtis Rourke, while accurate from inside the pocket, not super dynamic when it comes to running around and creating opportunities with his legs. You look at what they were, and I think every single person that put on an Indiana uniform last year got better from where they were the year before, several of which, by the way, were with Curt Cignetti at James Madison, and that culture that was created at JMU then translated quickly to the Big Ten. So it's going to be interesting, I think, to watch and see what the Coach of the Year last year, almost universally, pretty much every Coach of the Year award went to Curt Cignetti for the most part. Not all of them, but just about all the National Coach of the Year awards landed in his possession. It'll be interesting to see where he goes from here because there are holdovers from last year. There are important pieces that played pivotal roles last year, but they did lose a lot of veteran leadership, especially on the defensive side. So can it be sustained? That's something that we'll evaluate in the future. But 1 for 1, as far as Power 5 success is concerned for Curt Cignetti with the performance that he put on the field last season. At number 22, It's Deion Sanders of Colorado, also affectionately known as Coach Prime. So I look at what was done last year, and there are plenty of people that will point to the shortcomings of the Colorado program from 2023. And that is the conclusion that they've jumped to about what Colorado is going to be. And they refuse to acknowledge the progress that was made last year. I'm not talking just wins and losses. Wins and losses sometimes are a challenging thing to gauge progress on, because sometimes you might be a better team, but your record might not be as good because your schedule was tougher. You might be a better team, but you might not have as many wins because you lost a pivotal player at the quarterback spot in the second game of the season. That wasn't the case for Colorado. They had their star players like Travis Hunter, who went on to win the Heisman, like Shedeur Sanders, who did an amazing job in year number 2 at the system. Those guys were going to be great regardless of what the circumstances were around them. They're just exceptional talents. But if you look at where Colorado struggled in 23 and how much they improved in 24, that's what lands Coach Prime in our top 22 coaches in America list. They were much better along both lines of scrimmage. Now, far from elite along the offensive and defensive lines, but compared to what they were, Coach Prime clearly identified some shortcomings in his first year at Colorado, addressed those shortcomings, and the progress that was made was very obvious from start to finish. I think he is a coach that has a ridiculously high ceiling because of his ability to attract talent, because of his ability to get the guys to play insanely hard, and because of the conference that he's in. He's got a lot of support from a resource standpoint at Colorado. But it will be fascinating to see what happens this year. I can't wait to see it, because a lot of coaches can win games with the best quarterback in the country, arguably. A lot of coaches can win games with the best player in the country, arguably. I'm not sure there was much of an argument. Travis Hunter won the Heisman. So with those two guys gone, was it more about those two individuals and their elite level skill? Or was it more about the other 20 starters on the roster offensively and defensively? That's what we're going to find out. This year, we'll find out about the health of the program. What does the foundation of the program looks like? Because we know they have stars and we know they have guys that will play in the NFL, but foundationally, can the team win without super premier players at quarterback, wide receiver / corner? Will be fascinating to watch, but I love the trajectory that Coach Prime is on at Colorado. And if I had to buy somebody right now as far as their stock is concerned in the future, Coach Prime would be at or near the top of my list of guys I would want to invest in. Number 21, also in the Big 12, it's Kalani Sitake. And a lot of this has to do with long-term success, consistent success, and expectation. And I think there's a lot to be said, and I've said this before to coaches. Knowing what I'm going to get is of the utmost importance. When I turn on tape of the BYU Cougars, I know what I'm going to get. I'm going to get a team that's outrageously tough. I'm going to get a team that is physical. I'm going to get a team that plays through the whistle. I'm going to get a team that plays with a bit of an edge. And I'm going to get a team that plays with outrageous passion for their head coach. And I have said this before. I am unapologetic in saying it. Kalani Sitake is one of my favorite people in the business. I just really enjoy his approach to his profession. I think he does an amazing job. And you look at the success that they've had for a very long time. He's been there for 9 years. And you're going to look at the overall record of 72 and 43, and you're going to think to yourself, yeah, that's pretty good. That's respectable. But I look at how many different challenges BYU has had in that 9-year span. Remember, this was a team that was at one point independent and played one of the toughest schedules in America every single season. Now, 2020 notwithstanding, that schedule, a little more manageable. But you look at the 3 or 4 years prior to and the 1 or 2 years after, very few teams in the country played a more challenging week in, week out schedule than BYU. So the record, I think, is a bit misleading, because had he played a standardized Big 12 schedule, had he played a standardized American Athletic Conference schedule, that record would be much, much better. And then I look at the performances in the bowl games, and how their team performs in the bowl games is not always an indicator of program health. But what was one of the things I described when I watch BYU, what I expect? How hard will they play for their head coach? That's always on display in the bowl game. They're 5-2 in bowl games and have finished ranked inside the top 25 multiple times under his leadership. He's also done a really good job against AP ranked teams. He's 9-13 against AP ranked teams, but I would be willing to bet when you look at the personnel he was playing with and the personnel that he was playing against, I don't know if they always had the upper hand as far as talent is concerned. So Kalani Sitake of BYU comes in at number 21. At number 20, and what is a bit of a controversial pick at number 20 for some is Mario Cristobal at Miami. And I got to be honest, I understand that people will point to moments in his coaching career that left a little be desired. Everyone points to the Georgia Tech incident where they didn't take a knee and they lost the game. People will point to and cherry pick moments of his Oregon tenure and say, well, that wasn't very good. How about we just watch how the programs that he led, how they improved, and how the reinforcements along the line of scrimmage and how they progressed to the point in which they were top tier in the country under his leadership. Look at what he did while he was at Oregon. He was amazing, right? Amazing. Won a lot of games, did a lot of really positive things. And while people have said, well, there hasn't been much of a drop-off since Dan Lanning's taken over, well, Dan Lanning took over a pretty good situation for Mario Cristobal because Mario Cristobal had really built that thing up to the point in which they were an annual contender. Then he goes to Miami, and Miami had fallen on hard times. There had been positive moments at Miami for sure. Really positive moments at Miami under Manny Diaz and even under Mark Richt a couple years prior. Like Miami had some moments, but they were not a dependable outfit. And even in his first year or two, not the most dependable outfit there for Mario Cristobal, but they broke through last year. I think he's done a great job of utilizing the portal and going out and getting tremendous pieces in the portal to improve his overall roster health. But the program has been built from within with high school recruiting with an emphasis on dominating the line of scrimmage. And I think that is something that can be repeated over and over and over again. You will look at his record against top 25 teams at Miami and it will underwhelm you. But I also look too at where this team could be going here in the near future and how good they're going to be on an annual basis from this point forward. So I look at his ability to win, his ability to win on the recruiting trail, and the type of toughness that his team will play with. And I think it's commendable. So I think Mario Cristobal is appropriately ranked in the top 20. But if I had to point the arrow in one direction, up or down, for where the Hurricanes are going, I think the arrow is pointing up for Mario and the Hurricanes. At number 19, yet another very controversial figure when it comes to college football coaching rankings. And I think it's a little bit unfair. It's a little bit challenging for many people to get on board the hype train with Lincoln Riley. He's my number 19 coach because people will point to his shortcomings and the challenges that they had 2 years ago where they had a 7-win season. I look at the performance last year's 7-win season. There have been really disappointing moments in his tenure at SC the last 2 years. But what people refuse to acknowledge is that he walked into a program at USC that had really very little talent relative to SC's expectation level. And he took a quarterback from Oklahoma with him, developed him, and they were within one game of reaching the college football playoff in his first year, an improvement of 7 wins from when he took over to where they were in that first season. So it's okay if you have your doubts about the future of USC football, but you have to at least acknowledge some of the skins that Lincoln Riley has on the wall. How many times has he taken a team to the playoff? How many times has he developed a quarterback to reach their potential, whether it was as a coordinator and what he did with Baker Mayfield those first couple of years, and then what he did as a head coach with Baker Mayfield in 2017, what he did with Kyler Murray, what he did with Caleb Williams, what he's done with a handful of other guys too that have just gotten better under his leadership. I think Lincoln Riley, you look at the record, 26-14 at SC, not going to blow you away, but you look at the overall record, 81-24. Well, people will say, oh, it was built under Bob Stoops. Fair enough. Why was Bob Stoops capable of doing such a great job there from, say, 2015, 16, those final couple of years, because they had Lincoln Riley as the offensive coordinator, and he kind of reinvented what Oklahoma was going to be offensively under his leadership. So I look at Lincoln Riley. I think he's a really good coach. He's got 3 Heisman Trophy winners that he's coached. He's also, right now, has one of the top recruiting classes in the country for the 2026 season. And I think they're going to continue to improve. Last year might have very well been rock bottom in terms of wins and losses, but you look at how close some of those wins and losses were, and I think they could get over the hump this upcoming season. So buy low on Lincoln Riley while you can, because I think he is a guy that could very easily shoot back up the ratings with a really good performance here in 25. At number 18, it's Shane Beamer. Different USC. This one at South Carolina. Yes, the record won't blow you away, 29-22 in his 4 years at South Carolina. But what I like is how the team has finished the last few years. This is a team that if you watch South Carolina under Shane Beamer, September is not always pretty. October, frankly, not always pretty. But the way this team finishes in each of the last few years is something that has been incredibly encouraging. And that's a sign of recognizing where a team might have flaws, coaching those flaws out of them, and picking up momentum there down the stretch of the season. He's done a great job up against some of the top teams in the country. They're 7-12 against ranked opponents. You look at that number, but gosh, South Carolina, guys, 7-12 is pretty good at South Carolina. Not been a place that has long had some ridiculous amount of history. He's one of just a couple coaches in the history of South Carolina football to win 11 games. So I think they're in a really good position, too, with some of their young talent, with the future that South Carolina will have. With Dylan Stewart, Lenora Sellers, and company, they could be poised to continue to break through after what was a tremendous season last year for Shane Beamer. Number 17, a guy that is, I think, as underrated as anybody in the entire country from a coaching standpoint. It's Lance Leipold of the Kansas Jayhawks. He's 22-28 in his 4 years at Kansas. Between Kansas and Buffalo, he still has a record that is under 500. He's just 59-61. But you have to take into account, what did the program look like at Kansas and at Buffalo prior to his arrival? I'll save you the time. They were atrocious prior to his arrival. Atrocious. And you look now at what he did dating back to his time at Wisconsin Whitewater. The guy won 100 games in his first 106 opportunities as a head coach. 106 in his first 106 games. No one has ever won 100 games in their first 106. All right? Pretty dang impressive. And you look at what he's done. They have one of the top recruiting classes in the country for 2026 right now. They are 5-8 against ranked opponents in his time there at Kansas. And last year, especially down the stretch, they were 3-1. They finished 3 wins in a row against ranked opponents. This is a team that I'm buying low right now. I think this is as low as Lance Leipold's ever going to get, because this team's going to break through and be really competitive in the Big 12 this year. And people will once again be looking at Lance Leipold as a magician like they did prior to what was a disappointing 2024 campaign. At number 16, it's Brett Bielema at Illinois. And this has as much to do with his track record as it does his performance up to this point at Illinois. Because in the 4 years at Illinois, he's 28-22, pretty good. But he's been a head coach for 16 seasons. He's 125-80 between Wisconsin, Arkansas, and Illinois. You look at his performance against ranked competition. 4-2 last year, 5-6 overall. And they finished ranked in the AP Top 25 for the first time since 2007. They won their first bowl game in more than 15 years. And they had their first 10-win season since 2001. So if you look at what Brett Bielema has done in a very short period of time at Illinois, they're in a tremendous spot for future success. But I'm looking at the track record of Brett Bielema and the success he's had at multiple stops that has me feeling great about his ranking of 16 here in our top 25 coaches for 2025. At number 15, it is Eli Drinkwitz. 5 years he's been at Missouri, which, by the way, feels like it's been a little bit less time than that, but he's been there a while, and he is 38-24 in his 5 years. If you look at what he did at Appalachian State prior to taking the job at Missouri, he is 50-25. Granted, he went 12-1 that year at Appalachian State. He's ranked inside the top 25 the last 2 seasons. It's the first time that Missouri has finished ranked inside the top 25 in consecutive years since 2013 and 2014. He hasn't been great against ranked competition, just 7-14. But if you look at how his team has played against teams they're supposed to beat, they've been quite good. Now, I think for Eli Drinkwitz to take the next step, he's had a relatively manageable schedule the last couple of years. Now it's about taking the next step and starting to knock off the teams that we expect him to start pulling the upsets against. Remember, he's played Georgia very, very tight, a Georgia team that went on to win the national championship. No one played him better than Missouri in 2022, but now it's about winning those games. I think they're close. I think they're very, very close, but I've been thoroughly impressed with Eli Drinkwitz and what he's done in his first 5 years. And I still believe with their access to resources, his feel for the portal, and his ability to attract talent and keep great in-state talent home, Missouri's in a real strong position for the foreseeable future with Eli Drinkwitz at the helm as their head coach. At number 14, one of my favorites in the entire college football profession, it's Chris Klieman at Kansas State. 48-28 in his 6 years at Kansas State. 28 years the last 3 years. That's the best stretch at Kansas State since 2012 to 2014 under Bill Snyder. And I think back, part of my appreciation for Chris Klieman, and to be honest with you, Bill Snyder, part of my appreciation is that no one has ever won at Kansas State outside of those two guys. That's pretty much it. No one has ever done it other than Bill Snyder and Chris Klieman. And if you look at the consistency, are they ever going to have the ceiling of that of some of their cohorts? Probably not. Let's just be real. At Kansas State, you're probably limited on how many games you can win. Not all that dissimilar to what Matt Campbell does at Iowa State. Iowa State, though, has shown a slightly higher ceiling than what we've seen from Kansas State. Looking at what Chris Klieman's done, though, we know we're going to get very consistent performance most of the time. On an annual basis, look, are there performances week in and week out? Sometimes they look great. Sometimes they look a little bit like a dud. Sure. Yeah, that happens. But they've won 8 games a year in 5 of the last 6 seasons, right? They're not great from a recruiting standpoint, but they are giant killers. He's 8-9 against ranked opponents at KSU, and they've had 10 players drafted since 2021. So he knows how to find those diamonds in the rough. He knows how to develop those guys. And he knows when given the opportunity to play against ranked teams, he knows how to get his team prepared. Not to mention all the championships he won at North Dakota State when he was the head coach in the FCS. Chris Klieman comes in at 14, and I think you can make a pretty strong case. He might be slightly underrated in this poll. At number 13, mentioned Iowa State a moment ago, it's Matt Campbell. And if you look at what was done in the 9 years that he's been at Iowa State, he is above 500, right? 64-51. If you include the 5 years that he spent at Toledo, they are 99-56. He had 11 wins last season. That's the most in the history of Iowa State football. They've been to a bowl game in 7 of the 9 seasons that he had been at the helm there in Ames. You know how many bowl games they'd been to ever prior to Matt Campbell's arrival? They've been to 12. He's taken them to 7 in 9 seasons. It's incredible what he's been able to do. And the best part is he is extremely comfortable at Iowa State. He has had many programs reach out, gauge his interest. He's had NFL teams reach out, gauge his interest. He said, no, I kind of like where we're at. I like what we're building. I like that I don't have to go out. I'm not expected to go out and get the 5-star player that doesn't fit our culture. I'll take the 3-star guy like Brock Purdy who fits our culture to a T, develop him, and then in 3 or 4 years, he'll be an outstanding contributor for us. I love his approach, and I look at how he's performed. It's been very, very impressive. They've been ranked inside the top 25. They've been steady for the most part in his tenure as a team that can always knock off a possible contender if given the opportunity. So Matt Campbell, head coach at Iowa State, in there at number 13. At number 12, it's Josh Heupel at Tennessee. Been there 4 years. He's 37-15. You look at his 7-year career, if you include the 3 years that he was at UCF prior to arriving at Tennessee, his overall record is 65-23. He's finished in the AP Top 25 3 straight years, which is the best, by the way, for Tennessee since 97, 98, and 99. He inherited a situation at Tennessee that was not desirable at all. And it's ended up working out quite well. It had been a constant churn through coaches from 2009 till when he arrived a few years back. But now Tennessee is in tremendous hands, and he's done a great job of evaluating players. He's also got 2 10-win seasons in 2022 and 2024. He's got 30 wins in 3 years. That's the most wins in a 3-year stretch since they won 29 games from 2001 to 2003. And he's had 13 players drafted, with more on the way. They are currently, right now, with what they have available to them from a resource standpoint, ranked in the top 5 from a recruiting standpoint there in the high school level. They've done a really good job playing against ranked teams as well, and they've finally neutralized the massive advantage that Alabama, their biggest rival, had in the rivalry in the third Saturday in October. Over the last 3 years, he's won 2 out of 3. I think Josh Heupel has done a great job, too, of being a guy that at one point you think about his offense, you think about the tempo and how they kind of only ran at one speed. They wanted to run the ball. They wanted to air it out. They wanted to create advantages for their offense. But I noticed last year him evolving a little bit more towards making sure that that defense, which was star-studded in many ways, that defense didn't get gassed. Complementary football and the progress that's been shown there has me feeling very bullish about the future of Tennessee football and where Josh Heupel could potentially take them. He is in there at number 12 in college football. Finally, here in our final coach evaluation here in the top 25, we will, of course, do 10 through 1 on an episode later this week. But at number 11, it's Lane Kiffin, who has done an amazing job at Ole Miss. People like to be critical. People like to point to the shortcomings and the inconsistent performance and losing against teams they have no business losing against. All that is fair. But if you look at what Lane Kiffin's done, to have a record of 44-18 in the 5 years at Ole Miss is pretty impressive. He's also 8-9 against ranked opponents, and they had back-to-back 10-win seasons for the first time since 1959 and 1960. He is the only coach in the history of the state of Mississippi, including Mississippi State and Ole Miss, to win 11 games in the season. He's been to 5 straight bowl games. That's the longest stretch for Ole Miss since 1967 to 1971. And he's done an amazing job of adapting to the modern era of college football. He knows how to utilize resources via NIL. He knows how to utilize the portal. And he's, as a result, put together a very competitive roster every single year and will likely do so again in 2025 and beyond. I think Lane Kiffin has been amazing and is rightfully ranked number 11 here in our rankings of the top 25 coaches in the sport. That'll do it for us here at Always College Football. Continue to encourage all of you to like, to rate, and to subscribe to the show, wherever you get the show, whether it's on the ESPN College Football YouTube channel or if you're here with us via the podcast. Always appreciate you guys subscribing. It'll be there downloaded in your podcast inbox whenever we post an episode. So download and subscribe every single time. It does us a world of good if you can help us out in that way. For all of us here at ACF, check back with us later in the week where we reveal our top 10 coaches in the sport. We will do so a little bit later on. So for Mark, Jake, Jack, the other Jack, I'm Greg. We hope you have an amazing day. And remember, it's always college football. Hey guys, it's Greg McElroy. Thanks for watching Always College Football. Make sure you like, rate, and subscribe to ESPN's YouTube channel and wherever you listen to your podcasts.